Video by request, ab exercises for gymnastics rings. Here are 8 of my favorites. First off, we start with these stretch outs. This is kind of like using an ab roller, one of those wheel outs, the stretch outs, but I like doing them on rings or suspension straps better because you can adjust the resistance. The more you stretch out, the harder it is. Placing your feet forward makes it a little bit easier. Backwards makes it a little bit harder. Plus, it really does a great number for strengthening the arms, the shoulders, the hips, and a whole host of other muscles along the front of the chain. Make sure with all these exercises that you have consistent breathing throughout. You don't want to hold your breath. Keep your pelvis tucked in as well as you can. Walking backwards like that, that's going to make it a little bit more difficult, much more intense. It also pays to keep your quads tense during this exercise so that you have tension flowing along your entire anterior chain. And there we go, a little drop set there. Makes it a little bit easier walking forward. Now gravity's kind of helping me pull the rings in. Another variation on this is kind of a mountain climber style. Now a lot of people do this with very fast repetitions, kind of like they're marching. But with this type, if you're trying to build strength in your abdominals as much as possible, you want to tuck your pelvis and drive your knee as high as you possibly can. Hold for a second. You're going to have some tension also in the leg and the hip of the supporting leg as well. I also have the anchor points of the rings very close together. Sit-ups are also a very good exercise to do on gymnastics rings. Funny enough, you don't hear of this very often, sit-ups in general, let alone on gymnastics rings. But this is actually a very good way to target your abdominals. You keep your legs straight, flat on the floor, and I'm pressing into the rings with my arms as I'm sitting up. This adds a little bit of extra tension into your abdominals. It's one of these things that doesn't look like very much, but you have to try it to believe it. Setting the rings roughly about knee level. If you have the rings a little bit further up your torso, it changes the resistance, makes it a little bit harder, and vice versa. If it's closer to your feet, makes it a little bit easier. You can also do this with leg raises. Definitely a big challenge, picking up your pelvis, holding for a couple seconds. Again, pressing down into the rings with your arms adds extra tension or extra resistance into your abdominals in kind of a synergistic approach. You can make, of course, this easier by bending your your knees, bending your knees, making it a little bit easier. You can do this also with tucking your knees up into your chest. You don't have to keep your legs straight and locked out. Of course, you can also do all of these exercises as an isometric. You don't have to make them all dynamic. Transitioning with a higher rings, about waist height here, just holding the rings in a kind of a dip position, keeping your back tight, back of your arms tight, and picking up your knees as well. More difficult to have the legs straight out, but this is a very good exercise for strengthening your back and your upper body. It's also a very good upper body warm-up while you're strengthening your abdominals. In the front view here, trying to squeeze the rings in. Some people can do this with the rings slightly turned out as well. Brings a little bit more stability to the back. You can play and experiment with the ring position as you see fit. The other exercise, of course, is just simply hanging knee raises. This isn't one that I do a whole lot here because at the gym that I work at, the bars are at a perfect height for me to do without having to bring my feet down to the floor, but I figured I'd throw it in here at least to make sure it's covered. Also, hanging from rings, a suspended device as opposed to a solid bar, makes it a little bit more challenging on the abs as well. Straight legs are more difficult. And bending the knees makes it easier. This one's a fun exercise. I covered this in another video. Placing a bar in between turns the rings into a bit of a foot sling that you can push your heels directly against, and you can do pike ups or knee crunches from a plank position where your hands are on the ground. Keeping tension in the chest and in the arms, again, includes the upper body to a large degree. Make sure you're flexing the shins as hard as possible and pressing with my heels against the bar. I'm using just a regular body bar here, but a wooden dowel or even a PVC pipe can fit the bill quite nicely, but it gives you something that you can work against versus just letting your feet gently lay into the rings where they can slip and slosh around, and it compromises the support that you have while doing this exercise. It makes a big difference in the work being done by the front of your body and on your abdominals as a whole. Kind of picking yourself up. The hips moving up against gravity is where your resistance is. If you just tuck your knees in without picking up your hips, it's easier and less resistance. And then finally, we have side planks on the gymnastics ring, starting off in a bit of a lunge position, driving weight onto the ring, and holding with most of my weight on the ring and between my 2 feet. Bringing the feet in closer together makes it a little bit more difficult, and also, again, like the other planks from beforehand, the further you stretch out, the harder it is. And again, you can experiment with this as an isometric or a dynamic exercise here. Make sure you keep your shoulders and your lats tight on the arm that is on the ring. That will add shoulder stability and bring a lot more tension and stability into your core and hips as well. So there you go, 8 great core and abdominal exercises that you can do on gymnastics rings. Questions down below. Be fit, live free.